JC. Hey, good morning, JC. Thank you. And again, thanks to the vision of Congressman Pinjur for this important forum and his leadership on it and JC's execution of it. It's a demanding strategic environment, to say the least. And so it's great to be with you. And again, Lucas, thanks for that inspirational start. I'd like to thank all the parliamentarians here. I got a chance to speak at this forum last year. And many years ago, serving as a Navy commander, I was in our Senate liaison office. And the work that goes on between our military, our government, and the liaison that happens between those in uniform and those in government is really critical. And we only get better when we collaborate together. And so I think this is important to talk about some of those best practices. And it's also important, I think, to talk about and focus on the allies and friends and partners that we have in the room for that close collaboration as well. Every time I'm around our Ukrainian friends, I'm continued to be inspired, impressed, awed by their tenacity. And as JC said, there's great learning that's happening at a strategic and operational and a tactical level. And that's a good segue to kind of some of what I want to talk about today. Well, a great setup yesterday from a strategic perspective. This focus, this panel focused on national security, and for me as a former Navy Admiral, that really, I'm going to focus a little bit on maritime security, and Oleg touched on it a little bit, but that's kind of the practitioner that I grew up being, and I think maritime security directly translates into economic security. And so if you don't have security in the maritime commons, that's when you put nations and you put populations at risk. Last year, I focused most of my comments on the Western Pacific, like JC said, and I think some of those things remain consistent this year, but I certainly think over the last 12 months, there have been changes in the maritime security space. I liked the panel that we've had here this year linking the Euro-Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific. I think that is inextricable. I think that that's good for Asia, and I think that that's good for the Euro-Atlantic when we think about it. But there are also some strategic choke points that are in between those two spaces that we can talk about a little bit. But I think the operations that are happening in both of those theaters, and Oleg talked about that, I think are really, really critical. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about just a little bit of strategic, operational, and tactical observations, and then really I'll tie it up and hopefully we have a chance for a little bit of a dialogue. One of the important strategic things that's happening in the Western Pacific, but linked back to the Euro-Atlantic, is carrier strike groups that are deploying to the Western Pacific. Over the last year, France, UK, Italy have all deployed carrier strike groups to the Indo-Pacific, and that gives enormous opportunity for learning and collaboration. In concert with American carrier strike groups, these deployments, they generate readiness, they demonstrate resolve through presence, and they assure allies and partners in the region, which I think is really critical. In my view, these deployments are not destabilizing. In fact, they are stabilizing. And so I would resist the notion to think that more of these are going to destabilize. Our adversaries have already militarized the Western Pacific. And so the fear of that, I think, can be overhyped sometimes. And I think all of these allies and partner strike groups, I think, have a stabilizing effect. We need practice. So from the operator's perspective, you can't go out and do this at the point of need unless you've practiced it. And so we practice how to sustain these forces at range. These environments are not just contested, but they are congested, and supply chains are constrained. And so we have to work all that back office accounting where you can take all of these different countries and operate at range is really critical to practice some of those things. But they require whole of government effort and continued commitment, and I think that that's what I hope you would take away here on this. All those points in between. So these deployments are also critical to keeping open sea lines of communications. As many know in this room, the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, the Gulf of Aden, we do not have the freedom of maneuver, and there are global shipping lines continuing to not be able to transit those waters. That remains a truly contested environment. And so much of the large shipping companies in the globe, they are not sending their high-value cargo vessels through there. The impact on these diversions is significant, and you have so many shipping companies that are choosing to go around the Cape of Good Hope. They're making it work, but I've talked to many in the shipping industry that are yearning to get back to a sense of normalcy. I think we all have to be committed that 2026 is that year that we should return to a more normal state. So from an operational level, we're working hard with our allies and friends, like I said, on what is really interchangeability and continuing to push the envelope on that. I think we're making great progress. One of the examples that I pointed out to a couple of friends is Exercise Talisman Sabre that was down in Australia this year. Talisman Sabre 25, it had 40,000 service members across 19 countries and participating in truly high-end interchangeable operations. And this is a big deal. Admiral Sam Paparo, our commander of the Indo-Pacific Command, I'll just give you a quote that he said about the exercise. Quote, "Over the course of this year's exercise, we achieved remarkable milestones, refining joint operational capabilities, integrating cutting-edge technologies, and enhancing our ability to conduct complex land, air, amphibious, and maritime operations seamlessly." And I think he's right on with that. If you listen to some of his testimony, he absolutely believes that allies and partners are the United States' key asymmetric advantage when you talk about peer adversaries. And I absolutely believe that. You know, U.S. leadership will always matter in the maritime, but I'll be candid with you and say that the U.S. Navy is struggling at a point to create the operational depth that we would desire. And there are many reasons for that, both military and from a government perspective. We're working on that hard, but every single platform, every single nation out there collaborating at sea matters. And so I think that operational and sustainment interconnectedness is going to require more and more practice. From a tactical perspective, I'll just talk a little bit and maybe really listening to the great remarks that Oleg had. The U.S. Joint Force today is definitely equipped and trained for a high-end fight, and without ego, I say that we're darn good at it. But I would also say it would be hubris to think that there aren't blind spots. We are globally deployed in every AOR today. That does give us a unique opportunity to learn. I think we've watched what has happened in Ukraine and the rapid iteration of capability into the battlefield, and there's clearly great work and collaboration that's happening on that front. A good mix of high to low is essential, and so I think Oleg and I, we can have a talk about what that right mix is. I certainly welcome a dialogue on that, but a high to low mix is certainly required, I think, for the different kind of capabilities that we want to have. But again, I'll just compliment our Ukrainian friends on the tenacity and the tactics, and the continuing learning on the battlefield is really inspirational. I'll anchor back to talk a little bit about capacity shortfalls, and I think this gets back on the strategic level. Over the last year, for sure, in the U.S. Joint Force, we continued to deplete our stocks of munitions. It is absolutely a concern and a challenge for us, and industry absolutely has a part to play in building back up that magazine depth. But we're here at a parliamentary forum, and so our parliamentarians are finishing our National Defense Authorization Act. I think there are encouraging key provisions in that bill that get to this point. But it will not just focus on the U.S. industrial base, but this is where the collaboration of industrial base across allies and partners is very critical to partner on some of these things to get back to where we want to be on the munitions note. One last note in the maritime, and that's maritime domain awareness, or MDA. The time to practice, just like key functions on the battlefield, the key to practice maritime domain awareness is not at the point you need it. It's way left of that. Practicing integrated domain awareness begins today. My last tour in the Navy was in Singapore, and I participated in the Southeast Asia Cooperation and Training Exercise, or CCAT. And during that exercise, we got senior leaders in the room, and we tried to get together and practice key sources of information, key sources of intelligence, so that you're building that collaborative environment where you really understand what is happening in the maritime domain awareness function. And it's really important. We all have national sensitivities. There's all things that we have that we're maybe either more or less likely to share. And getting in the room with senior leaders and practicing that is really critical. I did that in Singapore, but I won't say that the Strait of Malacca is important. It's also the Strait of Hormuz. It's also the Strait of Gibraltar. It's also the Bab el-Mandeb. And so those functions and having true and an understanding of what's happening in the environment and a common operational picture is very critical. Your navies, your coast guards, your governments, your intelligent communities continuing to be involved in MDA, I think, is really critical when we want to have a whole sense of awareness about what's happening from a commercial perspective and a military perspective as you move from one area of responsibility to the other. So look forward to the conversation. I think it's been great so far today, and look forward to continued dialogue. Thanks.